Well, good evening, and glad you could join me again for another reading from Paperboy. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're staying safe and staying healthy. And I've been reading a chapter from each of my books each weekday evening while we're staying at home. It's Friday night in Portstewart in Northern Ireland, and I'm going to read from chapter 5 of Paperboy. And this chapter is entitled "Arrival Arrives." I was at the top of my game, the pinnacle of my profession. I had mastered newspaper delivery. No hedge was too high, no letterbox too slim, no holiday supplement too fat, and no poodle too ferocious. I had delivered through hail, hoods, bullets, and barricades. My paper bag was blacker than anybody else's, the blackest of all Paperboy's bags. I had alone survived when all around me had been robbed or sacked. I had made contact. I had achieved high levels of customer satisfaction too. One day, when I was at the doctor's with my mother and a boil on my thigh, we met Mrs. Grant from number 2, who always gave me a toffee apple tip at Halloween. "Your Tony's a great wee paper boy, so he is," she said as she darted across the doctor's waiting room on her way to pick up a prescription for her Richard's chest. The waiting room in the surgery had a shiny old wooden floor that you stared at while you waited, dreading a diagnosis of doom. It smelt of varnish and wart ointment. "He's the best wee paper boy our street's ever seen," the generous Mrs. Grant added. "He's never late, there's no old cheek, and he closes the gate." The whole waiting room stopped coughing and looked at me admiringly. "Oh, God love the wee critter," two chirpy old ladies. This adulation momentarily anaesthetised the pain of my throat boil, which had brazenly blossomed on the precise part of my thigh where my paper bag would rub. The word was out. It was official. I was Paperboy. Should have been on the front page of the Belfast Telegraph itself. But then it happened, as unforeseen as a soldier's sudden appearance in your front garden. Along came Trevor Johnston. A rival had arrived. Known to his friends as Big Jaunty, Trevor Johnston was older than me, taller than me, and cooler than me. He wore the latest brown parallel trousers with tartan turn-ups and a matching brown tank top from the window in John Fraser's. John Fraser's was the bespoke tailor to the men of the Shankle. Whether it was flares, parallels, platform shoes, gargantuan shirt collars, or tartan scarves you were after. This emporium of 1970s style was just across the road from the wee pet shop where I got goldfish and tortoises that died. You ride down the Shankle Road. From the moment you walked through the front door of the shop and got searched for incendiary devices, you could smell the alluring richness of polyester. It was where I always spent all my Christmas tips. It seemed that every single time I went to buy some new clothes in Fraser's, there was Trevor Johnston perusing the parallels. In fact, it was possible bomb scares. A veritable fashion icon of the Upper Shankle, Trevor also wore a Harrington jacket with a collar turned up. I knew these were very expensive. My big brother had got a Harrington for his birthday, and it was 20 weeks at 99p from my mother's great Universal Club book. When I said that I wanted one for my birthday too, my brother tore the page in question out of the club book and fed it to Snowball, our already overweight albino rabbit. I had to settle for a pair of faux satin kung fu pajamas instead. They were 20 weeks at 49p, but I was determined my Harrington jacket day would come. When Trevor Johnston put all his chic Shankle garments together, he looked like Eric Faulkner from the Bay City Rollers, and everybody loved Eric. When I stood beside Trevor in my duffel coat and grammar school scarf, I looked more like Brian Faulkner, the last Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, and nobody loved him. One day, without even a 5-minute telephone warning, there was Trevor Johnson standing with the other Paperboys waiting for Al Mac's van to arrive with the bad news. Evidently, he had been headhunted at short notice. The day before, Al Mac had sacked Titch McCracken, who was ginger but good at football like Geordie Best, and brilliant at twirling his bandstick on the 12th. Poor wee Titch had been having a sly smoke in the red telephone box on our street and had inadvertently dropped a lit match into his paper bag. Minutes later, the ash of 32 belly tellies and a half-cremated paper bag on the floor of the telephone box was all that remained of Titch's career. It had undoubtedly been the finest fire in our street since the last 11th Boney, but Mrs. Matchett across the road phoned the RUC to inform them that the IRA had carried out an incendiary attack on our telephone box. When Al Mac arrived on the scene, he was so incensed that he couldn't even speak. This was gross misconduct. Titch was so scared that he couldn't speak either. He knew he was finished. Al Mac's disciplinary procedure involved kicking the culprit on the backside halfway up the street until Titch ran up an entry crying, and from a distance we could hear him telling Al Mac where he could stick his paper round. So Trevor was here to replace wee Titch. I hated the way all the wee girls called him Big Jaunty, with gormless smiles on their faces. Irene Maxwell, whose da raced pigeons and limped, got a Jackie magazine and Look In every week, and so she was something of an authority on matters of art and culture. She once made the momentous prediction that them from Sweden that won the Eurovision Song Contest are going to be more popular than your man Gary Glitter. Every time I arrived at Irene's front gate with her weekly delivery of pop culture, she would gush, "Big Jaunty's lovely, so he is. He looks like David Cassidy." One night, I even spotted Irene and her best friend, wee Sandra Hull, who was only 6, got a twinkle, and permanently had parallel snatter tracks under her nose, following Trevor street by street on his paper round. Sharon Burgess had never once followed me on my paper round. Living as she did half a mile away on the other side of the Ballygomartin Road in one of the clean council houses on the West Circular Road, Sharon never got the chance to revere me at work. Her father was Big Ronnie, who riveted in the shipyard, and her mother was wee Jean, who permed pensioners and his and hers beside the. One Saturday night, shortly after the arrival of Trevor scene, I bumped into Sharon at the Chippy with the usual bag full of ulsters on my shoulder. Sharon looked lovely, with her hair flicked like the blonde one in Pan's People on top of the pops. "Do you want to come with me doing my ulsters?" I asked romantically, expecting an immediately affirmative response. "Why's up, wee lad? I'm getting a gravy chip and a pasty supper for my da, and the two Ronnies is on our new colour TV tonight," she retorted devastatingly. Sharon had rejected me for a gravy chip and 3 old Ronnies. And so no girl had ever followed me and my belly tellies, just wee hoods and robbers. Of course, Trevor Johnson looked nothing like David Cassidy. Just because he was the first wee lad in our street to get his hair feathered in his and hers didn't mean he looked like a pop star. And who would want to look like David Cassidy anyway? He was crap. I preferred to call Big Jaunty by his proper name, plain old-fashioned Trevor. I enjoyed that. But I also knew I had to keep well in with him in spite of everything. Rumour had it that Trevor's da was in the Ulster Volunteer Force, and so it was best not to upset him. I noticed that Trevor was the only paper boy who never had so much as an attempted robbery. I didn't know much about the UVF, except that they killed Catholics and beat up burglars. I still couldn't distinguish the difference between the UVF and the UDA, but I reckoned they were a bit like Shoot and Scorcher, the two main football comics I delivered. They each had different fans, but mainly the same goals. I concluded that they were both just IRAs for Protestants. Trevor's dad had big muscles and UVF tattoos and wore more gold rings and necklaces than even Mrs. Mac. He worked in the foundry with my father, but he seemed to have a lot more money than us. He ran the UVF drinking club down the road, and I suspected he didn't serve Ulster entirely as a volunteer. Trevor's dad had led the boycott of goods from the south of Ireland in our estate. He put up posters saying, "Don't buy Free State goods," on the same lampposts the children would swing on. He also promoted his campaign by marching around to everyone's doors and telling my mother and others like her to stop buying Galtee bacon and cheese, because by doing so they were just paying for a united Ireland. Ulster was saying no to Catholic bacon. I hadn't realised the pigs down south were Republicans, and even at the age of 12 and a half, I was slightly sceptical as to the purported impact of processed cheese on the constitutional status of Northern Ireland. More importantly, I loved Galtee cheese, especially on a toasted Vita loaf from the Ormo mini shop. And I knew my mother snacked on it too while she was watching Coronation Street. Once a fortnight, Mommy did a surreptitious shop on the Falls Road and would bring home a forbidden block of delicious Galtee from Wee Teresa's corner shop. My mother had sewed trousers with Wee Teresa in the suit factory before the Troubles. Apparently she was one of the good ones. When my granny visited, we would hide the treacherous cheese in the fruit tray at the bottom of the fridge, underneath the oranges, of course. When I delivered Muscle Men Monthly to Trevor's dad, there were always men with moustaches and dark glasses smoking in their living room, and I could hear Elvis records playing on the stereogram. Sometimes I wondered why so many loyalists were Elvis fans. They always seemed more Paisley than Presley to me. There was no obvious connection between the King and the members of the UVF, apart from maybe Jailhouse Rock. And even that didn't really make sense, because that was young, thin Elvis. And these Protestant paramilitaries seemed to like old, fat, white catsuit Elvis. But maybe Elvis was a loyalist. Maybe he was doing all those gigs in Las Vegas for the loyalist prisoners. He could have filled thousands of the collection buckets that came round our door. One Saturday night, at our local disco, the Westie, in a lull between Susie Quattro and Mud, I asked Sharon Burgess secretly if she thought Trevor's dad was in the UVF. The Westie disco was a good place to pose such a discreet question, because it was dark and noisy and no one could hear or see your eyes. "Big Jaunty's dad," she replied. "I don't know, but Big Jaunty's lovely, so he is. He looks like David Cassidy." I dropped my carton of hot peas and vinegar over the new platform shoes I just got from John Fraser's. So let's have a wee look at who's with us tonight. So wanted to say hello to, hello Alan and Ali. That's great to see you again. Hi Cheryl, Neve. Hi Fiona. Good to see you. Hi Marcy and Geraldine and Laura and Peter. Michelle Rose, good to have you. Amy Nolan from the States, good to have you. Hi Ellen, great to see you. My old mate from Lyndhurst Parade, the lovely Leslie, of course, is with us. Hi, Carrie Lee Bland, Kendall from Indiana. Lovely to have you along, Carrie Lee. And hi, Breed and Roy. Hi, Jeremy, Patricia. Betty O'Riordan. You can picture all these people. I'm sure you know a few people like this. Hi, Sadie Hannah. Hi, Francis McGrath. Oh, it's great to see so many people along. Hello, Damien. Hope you're doing well. Hello, Betty Campbell. Hi, Neil Morris. Long time no see. Brian Smith. Good to have you along. And hello, Mona, as well. So I'm going to keep going and tell you a little bit more about the rival who had arrived on the Paperboy scene. For 6 months, Trevor turned up on time and never thieved. He consistently delivered and was even starting to get some eye contact from Old Mac. My position was under threat. The more time I spent with Trevor, the more he irked me. He was, of course, the only Paperboy with no spots. He never had to use any of his tips to buy a tube of Clearasil, which he would have to hide at the back of the bathroom cabinet behind his father's old Brill cream jar that had not been used since his dad went baldy, in case his big brother found it and accused him of wearing girls' makeup. I noticed, when we lined up to get the newspapers from Old Mac's van, that Trevor always smelled of Brute aftershave, and he hadn't even started shaving. And so it came to pass that Trevor Johnson would be responsible for the most embarrassing incident of my life to date. Spurred on by jealousy of my rival, I used some of my birthday money to proudly buy my first bottle of Brute from Boots near the City Hall. I knew that Henry Cooper wore this aftershave and he had knocked out Muhammad Ali. I only wanted to knock out Trevor Johnson, so I was sure it would do the trick. As I opened my first bottle of Brute, I recalled Henry Cooper in the TV adverts saying that he splashed it all over. The instructions on the bottle itself said the same thing, splash all over. So that night, as I was getting ready to meet Sharon Burgess to watch her wee brother play the flute at the band parade, I did just that. By this time, Sharon and I had become an item, much to my great joy. But no one had warned me that all over should not include your Jimmy Joe. As the burning sensation increased, I rapidly ran a cold bath, submerged the painful region, and sat shivering and suffering in silence, in the vain hope that nobody would notice. My mother's intuition, however, intervened to inform her that something was amiss. Her persistent knocking at the locked bathroom door eventually forced me to admit my error with the aftershave. "Come on, love, tell me what's wrong," she pleaded. "I'm your mommy, love, it's all right." "Okay," I finally confessed. "I put Brute on my Jimmy Joe," I blurted out, "and it's killing me." Within seconds, Mommy was down the stairs and into the greenhouse in the back garden where my father was watering his tomatoes. "Oh my God, Eric, we're going to have to take our Tony to the Royal. He's put aftershave on his wee Jimmy Joe," she shrieked much, much too loudly. Could it? The prospect of being wheeled into casualty in the Royal with a Brute burn on my Jimmy Joe was an absolute nightmare. My mother's unnecessary use of the word "we" in this context completed my humiliation. I heard the sound of the watering can clattering on the crazy paving and my father shouting, "The stupid wee glipe." But then, to my relief, he added, "No son of mine will be going to the Royal with an aftershave burn on his..." This welcome pronouncement was interrupted by the outbreak of hysterical laughter from the nearby garden shed. My big brother had been in there with my wee brother, teaching him how to play poker with matches, and they had heard everything. The reverberation of their laughter on the shaky wooden walls of the garden shed continued long after my pain had subsided. My wee brother was only 6 years old at the time, but for weeks afterwards, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall with a new nursery rhyme, which he chanted again and again, with a delighted chuckle as he bounced up and down the street on his space hopper. "Our Tony put Brute on his wee Jimmy Joe. Our Tony put Brute on his wee Jimmy Joe." I was learning that a TV commercial was like the Bible in Belfast. If you took it entirely literally, it could cause a lot of pain. Of course, it had all been Trevor Johnson's fault. He had made me do it. When my rival first arrived to do paper delivery, the pecking order of paper boys was already established. The rule was that when everyone assembled at Almac's van for the distribution of the papers, the more senior paper boys received theirs first. By this stage, it was I who was in pole position. New boys and younger boys got their newspapers last, even if sometimes these included a couple of torn back pages for which they would have to suffer the consequences from an angry customer who played the football pools. The shade of the paperboy bags slung on the shoulders of the lineup of paperboys painted a spectrum of power and status. At the front, almost head to head with Almac, were the dirtiest bags, while the clean bags loitered nervously at the back. To my horror, after a few months of Trevor being in his employ, Almac gave him his papers first. This was getting serious. Maybe Mrs. Mac hadn't cleaned Almac's glasses that month, or maybe he was confused by the smell of all that brute. I hoped, desperately clinging to the possibility of some sensory impairment on Mac's part as an explanation. Suddenly, Trevor Johnson was everywhere, like little Jimmy Osmond. He was even in my scout troop. And when he was made the leader of my patrol group, just because he was tall and good at knots, I was livid. As we lined up, raised three fingers to God and the Queen and said, dib, 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 Trevor was at the top. Big Jonty was the leader of the pack. Then one Friday night, I was delivering the Jackie to Aaron Maxwell. I had struggled to remove the white knitting wool tied round the gate and gatepost to stop Aaron's wee brother from getting out onto the road, so I was already distracted. When I removed the glossy magazine from the grimy interior of my paper bag, there was David Cassidy on the cover. He looks a bit like Big Jonty, so he does. This was the last straw. I snapped, like one of my guitar strings being tuned too tightly. I hated Trevor Johnson. I wanted him to try to jump Mr. Hamilton's fence and catch his Dr. Martin laces on the wire and fall on his pretty face and tear his parallels at the knees and have to get stitches in the royal. I knew the only pacifist paper boy in West would not be thinking this way, but then again, we're justifying much worse. However, fate was to intervene, as generously as a drunk customer deciding to tip on Christmas Eve. It was just a couple of weeks before the banging of the bin lids for the anniversary of it was standing at our front gate, shouting up the street at me that I had just papers, and as I arrived at the merciless and still unforgiving guitar-abusing gate, who should be striding up the street towards our house but Trevor? Always looked like he was marching, even when it wasn't the 12th. Doesn't his son do the papers with you, love? My mother asked, and added innocently, you know, Big Jonty. He looks like that lovely wee fella that sings in the Partridge Family, so he does. I gripped my paper bag strap and breathed deeply. Hello, Mr. Johnson, what about ye? It would melt you the day, Mommy said, alluding to the fine. Och, Betty, love, what about ye? He replied. Isn't it terrible? Grandpa'll do to us. Och, aye, it's terrible, love, she complied. This was like talking about the weather to Trevor's dad. I hope you're not buying any more of that Papish cheese, he continued. Wouldn't touch it, love, lied my mother impressively. Just then, I noticed an unfamiliar feeling of warmth in my Dr. Martens, and I knew it couldn't have been coins, as it wasn't a Friday night. I looked down to see that Trevor's dad's dog had just peed on my boots. It was a yappy wee chihuahua, which was quite surprising because most of the loyalist leadership had Rottweilers. My big brother said men who walked chihuahuas were homos, just like we lads who played violins. He added this second fact just to peeve me, of course. According to my big brother, there was only one thing in the world worse than being a provo, and that was being a homo. I sometimes wondered what he would do if he ever met a homo provo. I thought homos were boys who wanted to kiss boys, and that had nothing to do with either small dogs or musical instruments. I myself only wanted to kiss Sharon Burgess, and I couldn't imagine Trevor's dad kissing one of his mates with a moustache in the EVF. Have you heard our news? Asked Trevor's dad. No, love, said my mother. Is your Martha bad with her nerves again? No, Betty, love. We're moving to Bangor. Yes, I almost leapt out of my squelching boots. Bangor was the train by the sea and where you moved if you got a good job in the bank. We used to go there on the Sunday school excursion, but we had to sing Jesus Loves Me and Not the Sash on the double-decker. Bangor had a Barry's Amusements that still used old money like my granny, halfpennies, pennies and sixpences. The Dodgems didn't do decimal. Barry's also had an old ghost train that was scary but not frightening. It was a safe sort of scary, not like getting a bus in Belfast in the riots. Bangor also had a very famous outdoor swimming pool called Picky Pool, where, as my parents told me, they would go for a paddle when they were courting. I never got to go in it because I always forgot my rubber ring. Of course, Big Jonty wouldn't need any inflatable assistance once he got there. He was probably a brilliant swimmer, like your man Mark Spitz with the moustache from the Olympics. My mother was genuinely shocked by Trevor's dad's. I'm sorry to hear your news, love. When are yous leaving? She inquired. This was breaking news, and I could tell she was determined to get all the details before Big Aggie up the street, who was jealous of her sewing and usually uncovered the best gossip first. September, love. Martha says it's not the same round here, since all the dirt from down the road are moving up, and she says our Trevor would be far better off in Bangor with his asthma, and it's got one of them new shopping centres. As he marched off down the street, I'm sure I heard my mother say something under her breath like, I'm sure they'll be delighted in Bangor. Afterwards, Mum rushed the fish fingers and smashed potatoes and disappeared for most of the evening. Later, as I ran around the corner to the erstwhile telephone box towering Inferno with two 2TP pieces in my hand to listen to the new Shawady Waddy single on dial-a-disc, I spotted my mother still sprinting from house to house like a good paperboy, conveying the news to the most trusted neighbours. She was clearly enjoying delivering these tidings. Sadly, I had to hang up on dial-a-disc after the first chorus of Under the Moon of Love because my big brother walked past and overheard me singing along and shouted through many of the broken windows in the telephone box, Are you singing down the phone to Sharon Burgess, you big brute? As I stomped home in humiliation, I noticed as I looked down that the white ash from Titch's papers was now covering my Doc Martens due to the adhesive properties of Trevor's dad's dog's pee. It was, I imagined, just like the layer of ash from Pompeii in my school history book. As I looked for a convenient pavement puddle to clean it off my boots, I noticed Irene Maxwell standing at her gate, crying her eyes out. What's the matter with you, Irene? I asked. She could hardly splutter the words out through her sobs, but I knew what was coming next. Big Jonty's leaving to live in Bangor, and he was lovely, so he wasn't. He looked like David Cassidy, and I think I love him, she wailed. Now she sounds like a David Cassidy song herself, I thought unsympathetically. Then I did 2 sins. Sins I had been told not to do. Uncle John at the Good News Club at the Caravan had told me not to tell lies, and my father had told me not to be such a selfish wee bastard. To my shame, I did both simultaneously with a heartbroken Irene Maxwell. Och, isn't that awful? I feigned. I hadn't heard he was leaving. And Big Jonty was one of my best Paperboy mates too. I'll Mac'll be raging so he will, and oh no, I might have to be the new patrol leader in the Scouts now. My thoughtless words only compounded Irene's grief. And so I made a stab at consoling her. Sure, you and wee Sandra might see him at Picky Pool on the Sunday school excursion next year. Although I heard Trevor's ma doesn't let him go out much because he's bad with his asthma. Poor Irene. I handed her my other 2 pence and told her not to worry because Shawady Waddy's new single was brilliant and that she should go and listen to it on dial-a-disc round in the telephone box, but that she should watch her wee sandals because the ash from Titch's paper bag was still on the floor. I was as heartless as an apprentice petrol bomber, but happier than a paperboy sent home on full pay because Ulmac's van was hijacked. Trevor would be transferred to a North Down newsagent, and he could take his brown parallels with the tartan turnips and his feathered hair and his inflammatory brute with him to bang her. And all the girls at Picky Pool would say Big Jonty was lovely, so he was, and that he looked like David Cassidy. But I wouldn't have to care anymore. After 6 months of serious challenge, I was to be peerless and without equal once more, undisputably the top paperboy in the upper shankle. So that's chapter 5. Thanks for joining me to have a listen to it. Oh, hello, Karen. Oh, you great memories indeed. And hi, Sheila. Hiya, Paul. It's great to have you all listening in and listening to each chapter of the book. That's me for this week. I'll be starting back in on Monday night, where I'll continue reading chapters from Paperboy, and I'll be doing that every week at home. So until Monday, do take care, stay well, and stay home. Bye for now.